Thanks. Welcome to our first ever live podcast recording. I'm Adam. This is Whit. The way Brenda said it was, she said, we're here tonight with our lead pastor, Whit, George, and Adam Bush.
Yes.
Co-pastors.
That's right. We're doing it together.
So
I love it.
That's an announcement we're making tonight. I'm also in charge.
Yes. What you've always wanted.
Yeah. I've always wanted to be the lead pastor of a bunch of churches. Welcome to our podcast In Motion. This is our first live podcast recording. Please give yourselves a big round of applause for being here. Thank you for coming and hanging out with us. I'm Adam. This is Whit, and we're really excited tonight. We are talking about, we're not answering the question.
Oh, yeah.
We're just talking about this subject. Can I be a Christ follower and smoke, drink, and cuss?
Yes. And other things.
And
I brought my thickest Bible.
That's how we know.
To tell you no.
That's how we know you're the pastor.
That's right.
Because you have a.
That's right.
Mine's just on my. So I've been demoted back to just being a podcast host. So that's great. So a couple of things just keep in mind. If you would like to ask a question, you can. We're going to have a time where you can stand. You can come in front of everyone, all these strangers, and stand at that mic later and ask your question vulnerably. Or you can text the word podcast to 23101 with your. My wife's like, that's a better idea. Text the word podcast and your question to 23101. Anytime, I'll get it right here, and we'll ask it at some point.
That's super cool.
Okay. I know we prayed already, but that part wasn't on the podcast. So I'm going to pray for us,
okay,
and then we'll go from there. Heavenly Father, thank you for allowing us to wrestle with our faith. Thank you for being the kind of God that wants a relationship instead of just puts out a bunch of rules, puts a chasm in between us, and then just says, follow these rules. But instead, you invite us to a relationship through your son, Jesus, and allow us to have doubts. And also, you give us leadership that can help us walk down the road ultimately closer to you and to Jesus. And we're so thankful to be able to do that, and tonight is a part of that. Help us to uncover more of you tonight. In Jesus' name, and everybody said,
Amen.
Amen. All right. Do you have anything to say before we start?
No, I don't think that I do. Just to go around. Well, you know what I would say is thank you for coming.
Seriously. Oh, yeah. You know, the very first season of the first podcast, because this will be in the second season.
Right.
But the first episode of the first season, we recorded 3 times.
Yes.
I don't know if you remember that.
Oh, I do.
The first question I asked you is, what did you do today?
Yeah.
When I was growing up, I was always thinking that like lead pastors were like waking up and just were immediately in like the golden presence of God.
Yeah.
And you said that's true.
It is. It's completely true. Yeah.
And that's how
I
today
live.
started.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I just kind of float around the room.
Yeah. What did you do today?
I took my car to be serviced.
Holy.
I went very much. I went to a sermon planning meeting or a series planning meeting for the fall. Oh, so that was rather godly.
Yeah.
Did that for 3 hours or so. Came home, tried to do some schoolwork. Took my daughter on a scooter ride.
Wait, you did schoolwork? Yeah, because not everybody knows you're in school.
Yeah, so I'm pursuing a master's degree right now at Whit College. So I was working on some of that, and then took my kind of played hooky and backed out of school and took my daughter on a scooter around the neighborhood. That's like our favorite thing to do. So she's 8. And we went zipping around the neighborhood, talking, trying to find American flags. That's like our game. Who can get the first to 10 American flags?
She's very patriotic.
She beat me today. Well, it's you see a lot of them, so it works. So, yeah, she beat me today. And then took the kids to Andy's, hung out with Heather, came here.
Sounds like a good day.
Yeah, it was a great day.
Why does this topic matter? Like we were maybe several months ago with Lindsay, who heads up our podcast. She's over here. Hi, Lindsay. How's it going? The 3 of us were talking about the second season. We were just talking about topics that we are interested in ourselves, things that you hear that people ask you as the pastor of our church.
Yeah.
This was one of them.
Yeah.
And why are we talking about the idea, can I be a Christ follower and smoke, drink, and cuss?
I think that there's something to wondering like where the limits are. If you turn a dog loose in a backyard, it's going to look for where the fence is. They're going to see how far they can go, and so same with kids, by the way, a lot of them. And so I think we all kind of want to know like where are the boundaries? What has God said I can't do? And even I think, increasingly, in fact, I was just listening to a podcast around this idea of like some of the things that I thought I couldn't do growing up, turns out maybe I can do, or things that seem so black and white, that seem so clear, in Sunday school, in kids' church, with my parents. I'm growing up, I'm discovering more for myself. Maybe it's not so clear. Maybe the Bible is more gray on this or whatever. And so I think people are looking for definition. And then all, spoiler alert, honestly, I think a lot of us, if I'm being honest, I think we're looking for how far we can go to do the things that ultimately we kind of really want to do before God will be mad at us.
Right.
And I get that question a lot, which is, it's the classic youth group question. How far is too far? Right. What can I do?
Yeah.
With my boyfriend, girlfriend, or whatever, before
God's mad at me.
Yeah, before God's mad at me. Is this a sin? People want to know that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
If I do this, is it a sin? What can I? If I go to the casino, what does God think? Yeah.
Sorry,
too late.
I hadn't heard the casino one before.
That probably doesn't seem like that big of a deal, but like 15 years ago, that would have been a much bigger
That's
deal
true.
in Christianity for people. You were at the casino. Now it's like, no one cares, but it did. It seemed that, one time it was. So anyway, I think people are looking for limits and what is it that I can and can't do. Yeah.
Yeah. So let's just start out right out of the gate. The question is the topic. Can I be a Christian and smoke, drink, and cuss?
No. I honestly, I don't. I think it's more complicated than that.
Okay.
Honestly, I do, and I think we have to kind of drill down into each of those issues, and I think it really depends on where the question is being asked from. That kind of makes the answer a little different. And really, when I think of smoke, drink, and cuss, I think you could include a whole list of things in there that come in for different people. What about pot? What about R-rated movies? What about Game of Thrones?
Music.
What about music with bad lyrics or whatever? Like, what is it that I'm allowed to do?
Yeah.
That where is God okay and not okay, and what's damaging? What's a sin?
Yeah, because let's just start with cuss. I mean, if you say, well, no, you can't cuss. Okay, well, can I say this word?
Right. Yeah, and
like,
what qualifies
okay.
as a curse word?
Right, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, in the different families and in different cultures, that changes from culture to culture. Like, not all cultures have the same swear words, or one word that's a really big deal here isn't so much of a big deal someplace else.
My friends are children's pastors in Australia. Hell is not, it's nothing, and they say it on stage in front of the kids. Which
what the hell?
Yeah.
Really?
It's not a big deal at all.
That's amazing.
Which here, it would just be like...
That would be so good.
Can you imagine teaching a bunch of preschoolers and saying it?
Yeah,
What the hell, Luna?
Incredible.
Yeah.
As a preacher, what a rhetorical device. That would be so fun.
Oh, yeah.
What the hell? It would just be fun.
Yeah. But
Wow.
that's a good example of what you're talking... Okay, so... It's just like culture. Okay, well, then why did these people... who decided that I'm not allowed to say this word?
Well, yeah, that's exactly... I mean, I remember being 19, 20, 21 years old and realizing that, some of the words that I was allowed to say meant the same thing as the words I wasn't allowed to say.
Yeah.
And being like, well, what's the difference? And why is this one off limits and that one not off limits?
Yeah.
And, who says and who gets to make these things? And it can start to feel like we're living in this kind of culturally constructed house of cards, and Christians are just playing a game. And I think, unfortunately, gosh, I think there's a lot of well-meaning people, who have, I want to be careful calling it a shallow faith. Maybe we'll say their understanding of certain things, and maybe even just the times that they grew up in, some of the questions that are being asked today or, whenever I was a kid, weren't even being asked whenever they were younger. And so there are things that haven't really occurred to them, and they don't always have the best answers. I've been there, It's like even some of the topics we're talking about tonight, I've had to really sit and think about, because they're not issues, for me. I'm not wondering if I can go out and smoke pot. It's just not a thing that I think about. But for some people, that could be an issue or a real question. And so, I think because of that, and I think maybe because Christians are nervous about not having an answer, we then maybe feign a bit more confidence than what we truly have, or we try to come up with like airtight answers, or maybe even just some definition that feels good to us, so that the question will stop being asked, so we can kind of put that away without really having to wrestle it out. I think a lot of people are in that boat. I grew up in church, asked this question, nobody had an answer. I was told eventually to stop, asking that question, and so I think we come up with sometimes the answers we've been given are incomplete or maybe unhelpful, and so we're trying to kind of process through that, and it makes us sort of wonder. And so what I end up seeing is that then people end up with these, I don't know, maybe anecdotes around Christianity that are, I'll hear this one, like, and this is sensitive. So if someone's been through this, had this happen in your family, please forgive the reference and whatever. I'm not trying to be insensitive about it, but like I've heard multiple times as a pastor, people questioning, like, they've had a relative or a loved one commit suicide, and so the immediate question is like, do you go to hell if you commit suicide?
Oh yeah.
And it's like, where did we get these? Like, we have these almost like old wives' tale ideas about Christianity. Like, if you do that, if you cuss in a church or in a certain holy spot, then that's like double penalty from God. It's almost like and the reverse is true. If I pray in a certain way, use certain phrases or words, it's almost like magic. That if I use the right words, then God's bound to do whatever it is. That, like, maybe the reason so-and-so didn't get healed is I didn't say it I didn't pray it just the right way. As if God works on an incantation basis if I say it with the right meaning, or for gusto, or faith,
You didn't say in
or
Jesus'
the right
name.
confession. Yeah, exactly. Then somehow it doesn't come true.
Yeah.
And that tends to kind of reduce God to like a magic spell.
Yeah.
Or a game that we play. And I think a lot of people, that's how we think about our relationship with God, is almost within the confines of a game. How many strikes do I get before I'm out?
Yeah.
We think more along the lines of these rules and what God wants and what I want, and we're kind of trying, like a negotiation, rather than like a real relationship with someone that you love, which is wildly different. So one of the things I like to say around this question is, maybe we're looking at it, can I do this? Can I do that? Will God be mad at me? Is this a sin? I'm not saying I think that's entirely unhelpful, but maybe we're coming at it from the wrong perspective. If I was to ask Heather, within the confines of our marriage, if I look at another woman, would that be a problem for you? Okay, yes. What if it's for 2 seconds? No. Half a second, a glance, like that's even the question itself is hurtful, because I'm sort of gamifying our relationship rather than thinking about it through the lens of our relationship and love, and wanting to please you and serve you. And I think the same thing is true with God. Is it rather than like, what can I get away with? What is it that you'll allow me by with and still let me into heaven or be okay with me? To rather think of it in terms of a relationship, like how am I best pleasing you, serving you, and that, I think, changes the nature of the conversation.
I was having this conversation today. My friend Casey, she's here. She's right there. Boundaries are still important.
Yeah, for
right?
sure, absolutely.
We were talking about this today, especially when you're younger. Especially when you're really young, your parents give you boundaries for a reason. We have this rule with Luna. She's almost 3, and just like she's not allowed to touch the grill no matter what.
Right.
Sometimes it's not hot.
Right.
But what I'm trying to protect her from is when it is hot and she doesn't realize it.
Right.
And it requires a level of trust from her to know that I want the best for her.
Yeah.
And so in our relationship with God, there is, and you talked about it this weekend, there is a level of trusting God's boundaries or God's no.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that is one of the first places that we start in our relationship with God, is that there are certain things that God prohibits, and he says, hey, don't do this. I mean, that's how God's relationship with mankind initially, that's one of the first descriptions that we get. Some of his first words to man were, hey, there's a tree in the garden. Actually, there's two trees, but there's one I don't want you to touch. And he never really gives them a reason other than if you eat of it, you'll die. And maybe it was just because he was saying, look, there's nothing significant about that tree. I'm just counting it, marking it off. It's out of bounds for you, just because I'm asking you to. Do you believe that I love you enough that if I say, hey, don't mess with this, that I have your best interest in mind? Can you trust me there? And it's like you and Luna. I mean, it starts there. I think that's the beginning. Hopefully, that rule is not in place when she's 20, but it's there now. Yeah. Because you can't explain all of dynamics of heat, and sometimes the grill is hot, and how will she always know, right? So you what you're hoping is that she'll trust you, and maybe that you've built enough relationship, obviously being mom and dad, that she's like, yeah, I'll follow through on that. And so, I think that is where God starts with us a lot of times is, will you trust my no?
So what you're talking about is really a matter of obedience, at least at the beginning.
Yeah.
I mean, it continues for the rest of your life and through your relationship with God.
I really think this. I think especially early on in what I would call God's development program for your life, and how God is, I think God's playing such a much longer game than we are. We're thinking about, like, what am I going to do next week? How am I going to get that, into that career that I'm looking for? We've got such short-term goals. God is thinking, think about it. This is a being with no beginning and no end. And he sees you through the lens of eternity. He sees the potential, like, who might you be in 1,000 years? Who might you be in 1,000,000 years? So God's just not as concerned with getting you where you want to go so quickly. He's doing something in you. I'm working through this book it's called The Making of a Leader by J. Robert Clinton, and it's a fantastic book. And he describes kind of the phases of a leadership journey that God takes someone on, and there are like 6 of them. And the first 3 are, and I was trying to sort of self-identify. In my case, the first 3 might be the first 40 plus years of my life. And in all 3 of those phases, he talks about that it's really more about what God's doing in you than what he's doing through you. And it's like, what if God's working in you for 40, 50 years to get you ready then for what you might do? And we're so concerned with doing it next week, next year. I haven't got that opportunity yet. They don't appreciate my talents. They don't see me, whatever. We're trying to get there so quickly. And what I'm saying is that maybe that hey, avoid this, hey, stay away from this. Like, maybe you can't see what the problem with it would be now. But maybe it's like a 20-year thing. Maybe in 30, 40, 50 years, you would finally understand. Or maybe you might never understand. But he's just saying, look, do you believe that I'm good, and can you trust me with this? And I think for us to have even the most fundamental relationship with God, we have to be willing to trust him in that way. Just to go, okay, I'll take you at your word.
Well, you were talking about this weekend preaching at our Tulsa campus. Right at the beginning of your message, you said, where do you want to be? Like, as we're talking about the Psalms and how it opens the door to 2 paths.
Yeah.
The problem with this subject matter about cussing and smoking and drinking, barring one part about drinking, it's not incredibly specific in the Bible.
Right.
And so I think so the Bible says that we're not to get drunk with wine.
Right.
This is pretty clear. Right. Don't get drunk. But when we look at the other areas of things that we could do, and can see that some people are okay with doing them, and some people aren't, I think we're just asking, how do we navigate it?
So and so I think it's helpful to understand the distinction between what's a sin and what's wise. So in 1 Corinthians 6, Paul says, all things are lawful for me, or other translations say permissible, but not all things are helpful. And he's saying, look, there's certain things that maybe the Bible doesn't come right out and say, God doesn't come right out and say, don't do this. He doesn't strictly prohibit.
Like stealing or
things.
Lying or things like that.
Those are obvious, like the 10 Commandments, right? We know God says, don't
kill
that.
people.
Yeah, exactly. So like murder's, never okay.
Yeah.
But there are other, more questionable issues, like some of the ones that we've talked about today. And they probably change from culture to culture throughout time. Like the issues that we're wrestling with today maybe weren't they definitely weren't. So in like 1 Corinthians, one of the things that Paul's wrestling with is, can I eat meat sacrificed to idols? Well, I'm looking around. I don't know if anybody's run into that question or if you're asking if you can do that. But I haven't yet to bump into anybody who was wondering, or I've got this buddy who wants to eat meat that the pagans were out in the woods trying to sacrifice or whatever, that he wants to use it for his barbecue. Is that okay? Like, I haven't run into that, but Paul did, because it was a common thing, because there were temples and animal sacrifice was a common part of culture. So the issues changed throughout time and culture and history, but the question is the same. It's like, what does God allow and not allow? And so Paul makes a distinction between what is permissible. Some things aren't permissible, but then some things also aren't helpful. And I think the question is, what is wise? What is helpful? And I think that to answer that question, you have to start to take a step back from just looking at the world through strictly a moral or thou shalt not lens, and looking at it more through a relational lens and a missional lens. Like, what is God calling me to do? Who has he called me to be in my community? Who am I meant to be on the job? Who am I meant to be to my family and to the people around me? And then you start looking at, well, then there's some of the things some of the behaviors, activities that I'm choosing to engage in, are they making me my best self for God, for other people, or is this really, does it have some real downside to it?
I think that earlier we were talking about just in the vein of what is God, or who has God called you to be. If it's clear in the Bible that I'm not supposed to get drunk, God has asked me not to do that. If I say, well, I drank last night, I didn't get drunk, but I drank enough that this morning I'm walking around with a hangover.
Yeah.
And I'm at work.
Right.
I'm not my best self.
Right.
Is that an example?
That's exactly what I'm talking about. So is that helpful? Is that helpful for you and the people around you? We talked a little bit about this earlier today, just on the really, I think, kind of difficult subject of marijuana right now. As like, there are more CBD, marijuana stores around. Just it's everywhere.
When I was a kid, it was completely illegal.
Exactly.
Now,
and off limits, and no one would even be asking if it was okay to do. Today, it's like a whole different thing. It's like, well, and there's different conversations around it, and people have different points of view on it. And I think one of the questions around it is, and talking recreationally, is like, is it helpful? Like, what does it does it make you your best self? And one of the things that we were talking about today is that even much of the language surrounding marijuana is this language of sort of reducing your senses, pulling you back, ignoring or being able to step away from problems, to find comfort or solace in something that I'm going, I see, I think there's a problem anytime where I start to find comfort in something other than Jesus, or refreshment in things that really God should be providing. I think as a follower of Christ, I have to really examine, is this then a healthy thing for me to be involved in? Or am I looking to a substance, whether that's weed or alcohol or porn or a lot of different things that one could use to sort of self-medicate, to feel better, to escape, all of those things that we can kind of turn to in that way. I just ask the question: is that then? I think it's not only I think it's unwise, and I don't think it benefits my relationship with God. So I think it's a problem.
And I don't want to skip over this part. Last year I read the book John Mark Comer's The Elimination of Hurry, and in it he introduces the idea that I had never heard before: escapism.
Yeah,
and it is the idea that potentially you are carrying some weight of your life, and you're looking for a place to escape, a place to just zone out. Netflix is easily like in that category, but what can take it a step further is obviously alcohol and marijuana. And today you said something that really I thought was a great line, and that is, what you're doing is you're replacing Jesus with that.
Yeah.
Right? Like, how so?
So I mean, you're looking to substances, subscriptions, habits, whatever, television shows, the phone. I mean, and I think we're all convicted by this because we all have our escapes. It's interesting to me that this is what we're dealing with in our culture, because when you look at our culture, we live in such a culture of self-actualization, which is a mouthful, but really it just means, it's kind of the idea of fulfilling your dreams, becoming your best self, all of this. And so there's all of this pressure to perform, to be successful, to get things done. I mean, I just think it's interesting. We take it for granted, but the pressure on our current day and age to be successful, to have more, to have a bigger house, to have things look a certain way, your body look a certain way. I think we're living in a day and time that with pressures that just people of previous eras and cultures just did not face. So no wonder then so many of our vices and our habits are centered around escapism. Because there's this constant push and pursuit towards success and more and achievement that we're just constantly looking for anything to be like, give me a break, please. It's like we're working out all the time and we just need a rest. And so, I think we are using those things for replacing Jesus. In other words, a relationship with Jesus where I find rest, replenishment, refreshment, all of those things. I'm turning to then other places to find that. And, I think in a sense then that becomes a sort of idolatry because I'm looking to things to fulfill a void that only God can fill and was only meant to fill.
And I think we said it here actually when we did the Q&A, like it almost works. Almost.
Yeah, it almost works.
Yeah.
I love that line. That's the thing about sin is that it almost works, which is why we keep doing it. I believe that anger works. That's why I get angry because I think it will work. Pornography, yeah, I think it will work, and that's why we go to it. Is if it didn't work clearly, like it was so obviously broken, we would stop using it, but we don't because it kind of scratches an itch. That's the idea of sin. I think is it almost gets you there, but it doesn't.
Yeah. This is like a sidebar, but as you were talking about all the things that we can escape to, I was just thinking about when I was a kid. This stuff didn't exist. Like for one, social media. So like there was no, seeing other people's lifestyles or bodies or vacations or whatever.
Right.
Like that didn't exist. Also, there wasn't that much to watch on television.
That's true. We had like 4 channels.
Yeah. And if you this is, oh my gosh, this is crazy that this is vulnerable. My favorite movie growing up was this musical called Newsies.
I remember that. I don't know that I ever saw it.
It was like Christian Bale's first movie.
Really?
Yeah, I could sing the whole thing. I know.
Do it.
No, I'm not gonna do it. There was a song about Santa Fe, and it was great. Anyway,
we got any Newsies fans?
Does anyone know this movie? Do you know, Chloe? That Newsies came on the Disney Channel over the weekend. The Disney Channel used to do this thing where they would be free for 3 days.
Okay.
And I guess we couldn't afford it or whatever. I don't know. So I recorded it, but it's just over 2 hours long. So the VHS stopped
tape.
The last 5 minutes.
Wow.
So I could never see the end.
That's amazing.
I never saw that movie again until Disney Plus came out.
Wow.
Like that's how long it was. Like
wow.
if
So you just recently watched it.
Yeah, it's great. It holds up. It holds up. But there wasn't. But all that to say, I would get bored because there wasn't that much to do. That's not the case today. Literally, there are television shows I want to watch that I haven't gotten to because I haven't finished the show that I'm on right now.
Isn't that the truth? There's this mountain of things you've got to do, and you just can't get to it all. The content is just constantly coming to us. Yeah, so true. So I think it's never been easier to escape, but I think the need has never been greater either. I think we're just constantly looking, and I even think that, gosh, it's hard to be alone. It's hard to be quiet. I know for me, it's hard to be bored because it's so easy to avoid it. That scares me. And it's honestly just moment of vulnerability. It's something that God's been talking to me about. I mean, when I was talking this weekend about, do I trust God's no? It's like, okay, can you reduce your iPad time? Can you pull back on that game of Splendor that you like to play so much, which I do. I love. I don't know if anybody else plays Splendor, but I love that game.
I mean, it only goes, you can only play it so many times.
Oh, I can play it about 3,000 and have.
It's not that good of a game. It's like you get your phone and just your average has gone down to 5 hours a day. I'm like, good Lord, man. We have some questions. If
Okay.
you want to send in your question, text podcast to 23101 and your question. That's right, Sam. That's how you do it. Did I say that right? I think so because they're coming in. This goes in line with what we were just talking about. I
Okay.
grew up thinking that Christians were meant to be the most morally good.
Wow.
How do we know if these things are sinful or not if the Bible doesn't specifically mention it?
To me, it goes back to what I was talking about is there's a difference between sinful and helpful. And so some things, while they're not defined as sinful, they wouldn't be helpful in your relationship with God and other people, and therefore should be avoided. And I think that comes down to using wisdom and looking around and being really honest with yourself. Why am I using this? Why am I watching this? Why do I want to do this? And being real about your motives and really being introspective. I'm reading a book on Eugene Peterson right now, the guy who translated the Message Bible. Phenomenal life. And I'm almost done with it. And it's been so good to listen to or to read. But one of the interesting things was like he struggled with his relationship with alcohol. Like there was lots of times where he questioned whether or not it was a good thing or a bad thing, or whether or not he should.
While
or
he was a
shouldn't.
Christian.
Yeah, while he was a Christian, he was really trying to wrestle with whether or not he should have this in his life. There were times where he would abstain, other times where he wouldn't, and he would go back and forth. And what he's doing is just trying to discern his motives and what's this about and why am I using? And I think that's. You can go, oh, I would never do that. I mean, you just shouldn't do it. Okay, maybe that's true, but I promise if we were all to really deeply look at our own lives, we would all find little areas of reprieve and things we turn to that's our thing that we're questioning. Like, do I have this pattern of buying things in my life when I get bored? Is that I notice that I do this every year around this time I go do these are things I've wrestled with in my own life.
I was going to say this sounds personal.
Oh my God, it totally is personal. So I've wrestled with my relationship to clothing, shoes, stuff. It's like, man, is this wrong? Is God okay with it? And honestly, I think the wrestling match is a really good thing. I think you should wrestle with it. And I think part of that too is doing that in community and with people that you're around, is godly people, to go to humbly submit that to them and go, what do you think about this? What are you seeing in my life? And is this an issue? And should I do, anyway, I think that's part of it. So yeah, I think we have to be prepared to lay things down that God puts in our hearts to lay down that aren't clearly defined as sin. One more thing I'll say about it is this. This is a personal conviction. I don't know that I have scriptural proof of this, but I honestly, I think there's something to this. I think it's dangerous to draw boundaries, let's call them universal boundaries, for people and Christians and whatnot, where the Bible does not. If the Bible doesn't say anything about it, who are we to turn around and then say, no one should do this? Because I think that's how you end up in places like, well, women can't wear pants.
They can't.
Yeah. Or you can only read a King James Bible. It's like, well, wait a minute, that's not in there. But then when we come in and we start adding rules to the Bible that aren't in there, I think that gets dangerous.
But what about your role as a pastor? I mean, we look to you for helping us decipher the Bible, which is really complicated.
Yeah.
I mean, how do you wrestle with advising us in the direction that we're following Jesus in?
Talk a little bit more.
This is a really good question. I don't have convictions against cussing. If it's not something that takes the Lord's name in vain or curses someone else, why is it harmful? That's not something specifically.
Yeah.
I mean, the Bible doesn't
great
just
question.
say, don't cuss.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. So there are some verses about the manner of speech and the manner of words that come out of your mouth, building each other up, those types of things. But yeah, I mean, I've wrestled with the same question myself, and I think what I would say is that I think we have to acknowledge culture and what happens communally, that we don't live just as isolated individuals, that your life is not just about you and Jesus and you guys can be cool and you could be angering everyone else around you and it'd be all right. So I think when I think about that, like, there's certain words, maybe certain phrases, maybe certain TV shows, whatever, that I'm okay with. Like even just this weekend, I told this story about my son Francis watching a TV show, and I didn't mention which one it was. And Heather was like, "Don't say which one that is," because there'll be some people in the room that'll be like, "You let him watch that," and it's like, well, it's not your business, and this is our one, and two, this is our son, and we felt like this is where he was at, and we were okay with it. Maybe it was a mistake, and maybe it wasn't. But different people have different like things that they, there are different ways of interpreting those things, and so I'm sensitive. I try to be sensitive, yet, you can't live your whole life that way, but I think I try to be aware and cognizant of other people and how they interpret and feel things. And so if culturally we've gone, hey, these are words that are crass, that are crude, that you just wouldn't say, and then I'll be like, okay, then I'm going to avoid that. And even in Christian community, that where maybe if Christians are known for having a different kind of language and a different way of speaking, then maybe I'm going to honor that culturally, so that I'm not leading people into a wrong impression or giving people, a bad idea. I don't know. Those are things I think about. I think I have to take other people into consideration. It's not just about me and what I think is okay.
It kind of sounds like you're saying, like, look, you're a human and you live on this earth and you're part of a culture and a community.
Absolutely.
And just growing up a Christian, there was this idea. I could do a whole podcast on this by myself. I don't even need you for this. But there was this, Casey will relate because we grew up really similarly, but there was this idea like in this world but not of this world. Mm-hmm. But it would be a little confusing because it would kind of feel like, well, I'm not even a part. But that's not, God gave me a body that lives on this earth.
So true.
And so I am a part of what's happening in this community.
What's fascinating is that when you fast forward to Revelation and you read kind of at the end of time, it describes the different people and languages and tribes, and it describes them coming to the New Jerusalem, this heavenly city, or earthly city at that time, that is filled with different cultures. And if there are different languages, then there are different cultures, because language is a part of culture. Mm-hmm. Language shapes culture, which we can totally see when you think about the evolution of the English language just in the last 20 years. And so, things like Urban Dictionary that didn't exist 20 years ago, how has slang changed even just culturally, the way different words mean, there's so much that happens in that. So language is a part of culture. And what that tells us is that when at the end of time, language and culture will still be intact, meaning when we get to heaven, our cultural identity isn't wiped away. And it's like we all become this new blank slate and sort of one kind of culture, one kind of person, but there will be different ethnicities, tribes, perspectives, all of this represented, which I think is beautiful and wonderful. And by the way, like, why did God make us with such distinctions and different perspectives if he didn't love it and appreciate it? I think he totally does.
Even in simple, concrete terms, it's just like, there are words that I use that I don't use around children.
Absolutely.
Like, I don't specifically say crap around kids just because, like, I don't know, it's a little crass, and so I'm not going to do that. That would be a good example.
Yeah, and just like, I don't know, maybe we edit this out of the podcast, but let's just see where this goes. But like, even in my own life, like, I have friends and people that I'm around that I use different words with. We'll just leave it there. Yeah. That I wouldn't use definitely on a stage or with people I don't know all that well. Just because, and I don't think that's duplicitous. I think that's wise.
And I think that is a common thought, that you are like, oh, well, if you won't say it.
Yeah, if you're not going to be true. Yeah, exactly. And again, like I said, read 1 Corinthians. Paul's really clear about there are certain things I do with some people and certain things I do with other people. Mm-hmm. And it depends on how they take it, if this person is offended by this, then I'm not going to do it. Mm. If this is going to cause someone to stumble, then I'm not going to do it. I'll avoid that around them. Even though it doesn't bug me, I'm not going to do it with them because I know how that impacts them. He's super aware of his community and culture and the people that he's around. And I think as Christ followers, we ought to be the same.
I just think this is a funny story, but when I was 15, I got asked by a girl to go to homecoming. Right. I've never told Diana this story before. And my mom took me to Bell's department store. Anybody remember Bell's?
Oh, yeah.
You do? Okay, a few people. And I got these pleated khakis.
Sweet.
And, and a polo shirt. And I put it on. I looked in the mirror. My mom was there, and I go, I look dang good. And my mom goes, don't say that word.
Yeah, I mean, those are, you know what? Well, I think about that, like the words that, like all the Christian cuss words that we...
Oh, yeah.
I always used to think about that. Like I'd play Halo years ago with friends, and we go, what the F? Just the letter F. And I would just be like, why not just say it? Because that's what you mean. What's the point?
Others do.
What the frick?
Yeah.
Like...
Right.
Yeah.
Well, crap.
Have you seen the kid, the frickin' fricks kid, the Mario rant kid, or the Sonic the Hedgehog rant kid? That kid is amazing. No one have. Let me just bless you with this guy. Just Google or YouTube search Sonic rant. This kid is incredible. It's the best video.
We'll put it in the podcast notes so that you can look it up later. All right, we have so many questions that we haven't gotten to. One thing you did say earlier that I thought really is the end. It's the moral of the story, but you said something along the lines of like what is the purpose? What is the condition of your heart? What are you trying to accomplish whenever you're escaping with whatever it is, alcohol, marijuana, whatever, not cussing, that's kind of different. But I mean, ultimately that's what we're talking about. Like we're trying to move closer to a relationship with Jesus. Some of these things are hindering that.
Yeah, you know what's interesting too is one of the fruit of the Spirit is self-control. So I would think that a life deeper and more intimately connected to Christ would be a life with more self-control, not less. And so I think I have to be thoughtful around like what even things that I don't believe are sin. I still think there are times where you go, yeah, but I'm going to cut that out. See, Hebrews 12 says, "Let us therefore lay aside every weight and sin, which does so easily entangle us, and let us run the race with endurance." Your life is a race. You're running a lengthy race. And Paul talks about like run to win. And so this idea of laying aside, I love the distinction between weight and sin. I think that's burdens like, I think some of us have, in fact, I think all of us have burdens of past, burdens from our family, burdens that we need to let go of. But I think also some of those things could be vices that aren't necessarily sinful, but there are maybe habits, subscriptions, things we do, places we go, things we say, stuff we like that's just not helpful, or it's a weight that needs to be laid down so that we can run our race a little bit more effectively. And I again, to me, when you see your life as being completely and utterly consumed by who God is and what He wants for you, it changes the way you think about your behaviors.
You said one of your things was shopping. Mine used to be, do I need to watch the entirety of The Office for the 12th time?
Wow.
But then it stopped with that, and it was, do I need to watch every Marvel movie in order again? But it is a real, that is a real example. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's something it's not a sin to watch Spider-Man Homecoming, which is a great movie, but
right.
But that's what you're talking about.
Yeah, not wrong, but helpful.
Yeah.
Again, yeah, and again, like that will so depend on the individual situation.
We're getting some of the questions we expected.
Okay.
So here they come.
All right.
What if a doctor prescribed pot to help with my anxiety?
Yeah, so, I think, first of all, I'm not a doctor.
What?
Yeah, and so I want to be careful about making, I think anything having to do with like a medical condition is really something between you, your doctor, and the Lord that you would need to wrestle with. I mean, there are people, I've got friends who are on antidepressants, and I totally don't think there's anything wrong with that. But then I have, I've known other people that are like, I was taking this medication, but it made my head feel fuzzy. I didn't feel completely myself. I needed to get off of it. I think those are very personal choices that, like I said, I think are between you, a doctor, and the Lord. Obviously, anything leading to addiction, dependency, not good.
The stories that we tell at the church on video, a lot of them I do the interviews for, and story we told last week, or that I interviewed for last week, was a lady saying that she was getting painkillers for, I think it was for back pain, but she said it got to the point I didn't have the pain anymore, and they were still giving me the pills, and I was still taking it. And so obviously that would be a situation where you would begin to ask yourself, what am I doing?
That's where I think, like I said, your doctor, and the Lord, because just because the doctor's recommending it doesn't mean you should do it. But so I think there's wisdom that needs to be used there. One, discernment with you and God. Two, wise counsel, people around you. So yeah, sometimes the doctor's recommendation is spot on and sometimes not. That's something that the individual is going to have to weigh out.
If I smoke pot to fall asleep, is that bad?
Oh my gosh. You know, I think the issue of pot is a really complicated one. I think, you know what I was thinking of earlier, and really trying to kind of discern this issue, because this has never been an issue. I mean, I've never even had the desire or even interest in wanting to explore this. So I'm having to kind of think about this through a perspective that is not my own, because it's never been something that I've struggled with.
It's also new just to Christianity.
It really kind of is, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah, like I said, I think if I'm in your situation, I think I'm looking for other ways to fall asleep than pot. Mm-hmm. I think there's some things about pot that are, where I think they're unhelpful. Anything that I think alters your mind, changes the way you think, perceive things, I think that's something to be really thoughtful about. The Bible is clear when it talks about alcohol, it's talking about intoxication. Do not be drunk. And this is talking about basically inhibiting yourself in a significant way so that you're not really who you are. And I think that's something to be really mindful about. When I think about pot, I think there's certainly aspects of it there. I think it modifies the personality in such a way that I think there's some real concern over whether or not I can do this wisely in a helpful way. So I think from my perspective, I would be looking for other ways to fall asleep. And maybe the thing is not so much that I'm looking for a way to fall asleep, but maybe I would start examining my life to go, what's keeping me awake? What am I doing? Am I living in such a way that I'm struggling to fall asleep because of other things that I'm doing? And so pot becomes this kind of like secondary or tertiary issue, like downstream thing, when really the upstream problem is that I'm on my phone like 12 hours a day. Or whatever, right? So maybe, or maybe it's social media, or maybe it's a dietary thing. Like maybe we're using substances to solve upstream, or to deal with upstream problems that really you're not dealing with it, you're just masking something. I think that happens a lot.
Yeah. The phrase is, the thing is not usually the thing.
Yeah, generally it's not. Yeah, generally it's not.
All right, let's move from pot to cussing for a little bit.
Let's talk about it.
Is taking the Lord's name in vain really saying Jesus Christ or GD when you are mad or frustrated, or is it something deeper?
Like the commandment? Like the thou shalt not take the Lord's name in vain?
That's not in the question here. So
I think I'm going to assume that's kind of where we're going.
Yeah.
The commandment is certainly a lot more than that.
Because I'm assuming this person is probably saying, like, is it like acting not Christ-like, but saying you're a Christian, because that's definitely a part of the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think taking the Lord's name in vain is way more than saying Jesus Christ or GD or something like that. I think it's way more than that. I think it's not. I think that's part of it, though.
Well, it is something.
Yeah, like I think that is something. Yeah, like for me, I could never find a reason to justify saying that.
Why?
To me, it's just disrespectful to someone that I love. So I just wouldn't do it. So yeah, for me, I'm like, I can't go there, because if I love Jesus, how can I use his name so casually in such an exclamatory way? I don't know if that's even a word, but I just made it up. But like that. Yeah. Like as a venting for emotion.
Like Whit George.
Yeah. I mean, it feels right. Right. It is. It's to me at the very best, it's disrespectful.
Yeah. I was making a joke, but that would be kind of weird if I got mad and I just yelled, "Die in a bush." Like, that would be. It was not a great.
It's not. Yeah, it doesn't feel good. So for me, I think that's there. But as for the commandment, I think the commandment is about so much more than that. I think it's about taking on the name of Jesus in your life and then living in such a way that I dishonor his name And therefore, I've in some sense taken it in vain. And there's a lot we could talk about with that, but yeah.
That'll be another podcast.
Yeah, maybe so.
I haven't read this whole thing because it's really long, so I hope that it goes right. I don't have conviction against cussing. If it's not something that takes the Lord's name in vain or curses someone else, why is it harmful? Why can't I use the real word instead of replacement Christian words? Okay, you were talking about this.
Totally, yeah.
With the same inflection and meaning like crap and dang that help them feel like they are above cussing.
Yeah, I get it. I totally get it. I get the game that it feels like that we're playing there. My argument would go back to just culturally and representing Christ to the people around me. Again, it's not about and I say this respectfully to myself and to all of us. It's just not all about you. And it's just not all about what you want to do or what you think you can and should be able to do. I'm aware of how other people interpret my actions and what happens in the world around me and who I represent and how I represent God and the Lord to them. And so with the language that I use, I'm just aware of that. I guess here's the thing: is if everyone around, and you might say, well, everyone around me is comfortable with those words, and those are the words that they use. And I would say, well, then maybe by not using them, I represent Christ in a way that is intriguing to them. And maybe and maybe even in that sense, maybe even I am challenged in the other words that I'm using as replacement words. Maybe I work to process anger, frustration in other ways that then would represent Christ in a more helpful way. So
this is a really concrete example that you know, but maybe everybody else doesn't. I got into, by the stroke of luck, I got involved in the stand-up comedy scene here in the city and then around the country because of the pandemic and Zoom mics and that sort of thing. I don't cuss, just as a mostly general rule, and I specifically don't cuss in my comedy because I feel like it's harder to write a joke without cuss words. And obviously everybody else, like, I will never invite you to one of these open mics because they're terrible. But I have noticed that, and it's what the Bible says, there is a being set apart.
Yes.
Because of it.
Yes,
and there have
totally.
been, now that I'm about 2.5 years into it, there have been moments where I've been able to bring other people to church, but I've also been able to have conversations with people whose marriages are falling apart. Or I don't ever say I'm a pastor, but it's just, if you follow me on Instagram or Facebook, you're going to figure it out. And there have been moments when people have pulled me aside or messaged me and said, hey, I know you're kind of a God guy. I just have this question. And that's what I'm looking for. And I feel like that's maybe what we're all looking for, right?
Well, I think again, our lives are so much more than just our own. In fact, like there's a real verse that says, you are not your own. You were bought at a price, right? So I think my words, my actions, my career, everything about me is meant to glorify God. So yeah, and I think what that means is not only should you check yourself on the words that you're using, like the real cuss words, or if we want to call them that, but even the fake ones too, or the Christian ones too, and go, am I glorifying? Like, it should be a challenge for all of us, not just those of us who are comfortable saying, the real stuff, and those who are not. But I think we should all be asking, like, what's my motivation, or what's happening here? Am I glorifying God in my speech? I have to think about that. Yeah. Because I don't.
Not just as a pastor, as a follower of Jesus.
Yeah, and sometimes I'm not glorifying God in my speech, and it has nothing to do with saying 4-letter words. It has things to do with, am I demeaning to my wife? Am I subtly demeaning to my kids in the way that I've said that? Is my sarcasm helpful? Like, I think a lot about that. Is sarcasm, how do I treat people, like the people in my family, like, my kids? Is my sarcasm building people up, or am I consistently tearing them down subtly with the sarcastic humor that I'm using? I think those are things to think about. Like, the way we glorify God with our language is so much more than what 4-letter words did you say or not say today.
Yeah.
But is my speech building one another up? So, there's a verse, let the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be pleasing to you. Wow, like, what if I started praying that and meditating that and really thinking about that, and what might happen if I did? How might I change?
This is for another podcast, but the other day you had said, even the shows that we're watching, the sarcasm, the writing that's maybe in them, how is that? Am I watching it so much that it's impacting
Absolutely.
the way that I communicate.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, this has gone by so fast, like our time together. So we don't have a lot more time. So if you have a question, text podcast to 23101 and follow the prompts. And I got to, maybe you'll beat the other questions that I'm choosing from. Let's see here. Sorry. This is a great question. This came early. What are some steps I can take to not use escapism? Whit said to rely on Jesus instead. But that seems vague.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I was moving quickly.
Just a little criticism for you.
No, it's okay. It doesn't feel like criticism. I think it's great. I think that's totally fair. It was vague. So I think I would want to know, what am I looking for first? I think start there. Just like, what am I looking for in my escape? Try to discern the feelings that you're looking for.
The perspective of the person. Okay.
Yeah, so it's like, am I afraid? Am I hurt?
Yeah.
You need to know what you're looking for. A lot of us are running away from pain, or maybe it's fear. What's motivating the escapism? Is it pride, selfishness, lust? It's like a long time in my life, lust, and still is a battle. And when I say lust, it doesn't always mean sexual lust, just lust for the next thing. So I think it's important to know, what am I after? What am I searching for? And then what that allows you to do is, I think, honestly take that to God through prayer and talk to him about it. And then secondly, that's what the church community is for. And I don't just mean the big, big church, but I mean like the intimate church, the peer group church, who are you in community with that you could talk that through with, and see how God might, in that conversation, illuminate some next steps for you. Here's what I found is that when I bring things like that to God and I go, okay, God, I don't know what to do with this, but this is what I'm feeling. I'm fearful, or I'm lusting over here, or I'm hurt and I'm not sure what to do with it. That he's always faithful to provide a next step. So that might be, hey, maybe it's go see a counselor. Maybe it's sit down with a friend or whatever. There's any number of next steps that there could be, but I just know that whenever I've done that God always is faithful to provide some next step that then hopefully can lead to me dealing with that real issue and then finding some real peace on the other side of that. And maybe even finding some new practices. So there's a lot of books on this. I would recommend probably anything by John Mark Comer in that regard. He talks a lot about that, the way of Jesus. There's more of that, but just practicing spiritual disciplines in your life. Pete Scazzaro has written some great stuff on that. There's good resources out there in that regard.
This question takes it from a bit of a different perspective. Is there a right way to correct people in my life who are using these things to escape?
Yeah, I think they're going to need to know that you care about them first. I think correcting them can be really tricky. So I think it's about finding the right place, right time, right moment. I would make that a matter of prayer, and I wouldn't be in a hurry to do it. Unless I really feel like somebody's just like right on the edge, it's very dangerous. Those are, kind of pull the e-brake moment. That's a little different situation. But if I have someone that's like consistently practicing some things, I'm gonna probably pause and pray and ask the Holy Spirit to give me guidance on how to begin a conversation in that way. And he'll reveal it to you. I believe he'll give you the answer.
I had a question that I think I maybe want to ask first. If what's a good way to ask this? What you're talking about there is being in community, and we talk pretty regularly on the podcast and at the church, just the importance of community and being able to be honest and vulnerable with other people.
Yeah.
And one of the ways that God can really bring that into your life is through marriage, especially if you're both Christ followers. One of the things I learned pretty early on from the person who did our premarital counseling, he said the Holy Spirit will regularly sound like your wife's voice. And that's a beautiful thing. But if I'm single,
right,
what are some ways that I can make sure that I am consistently putting the mirror up in front of me in regards to other people? Like, what does that look like?
I think American culture, just our kind of rugged individualism, doesn't work well for singles. I just have to be honest about that. I think even our church culture, impacted as it is by American culture, tends to couples hang out with couples, and it's harder to invite single people into that world. Even if I'm not weirded out by it, it's just like, there's 4 of us and a buddy. And so how does that, like, we all feel it, I think.
Yeah.
And so I think as a single person, I think you're going to have to work maybe a little harder, just because I think culturally it's a bit more of an uphill battle to fight for community. I think the natural ebb and flow of culture will push you easily toward isolation. And I think you're going to have to work to stay close and vulnerable and transparent with people that you can find community with. And I have friends, like one of my closest friends, Hank's here tonight. He's single. But we have, and Hank's been so great about this, like just last week or maybe a week before, it was like, hey, can we talk one night? I'm like, yeah, let's do it. So, we'll sit down and just have a conversation. And that happens every so often. It's just like, hey, I need to kind of unload some things that are on my heart. But that takes him being vulnerable enough to go, I need this.
Yeah.
And to step in and do that. And I think we all need people in our lives, married, single, whatever. But I think if you're single, it probably means you're going to have to work a little bit harder for that. I think that's just reality.
I know the answer to this, but I don't know another way to ask it.
Okay.
Can I ask God to bring those people in my life if I don't?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a wonderful place to start. Absolutely. Yeah, is to make that a matter of prayer for sure.
All right, I got some real practical questions.
Okay.
Just give me some answers.
Okay.
As a Christ follower, can I drink in public, or should it be only in my house?
Yeah, I think that's a question of personal discernment.
I'm looking
honestly.
for yeses or nos. I want to tweet it.
Right.
People are still tweeting, and I want to be one of them.
Pastor Whit said, yeah,
He said.
I don't think there's a clear answer on that. I truly don't.
Okay.
Yeah, so I think that's something that you're going to have to be thoughtful about.
Can I social drink with unbelievers, people who don't follow Jesus?
I think that really depends. Yeah, so I think that truly depends on, for me, I would be thinking about how those people deal with alcohol and what their relationship to it is. Because if it's unhealthy, I probably don't want to participate in that. Because what I don't want to be saying with my participation is, I think this is okay what you're doing, and I'm part of it too.
Yeah.
So I think there's something powerful about abstinence in certain environments. Even for you, if it's not sinful, I still think there's something powerful about that when I think about the way that other people approach those things. Again, I've got buddies, friends that I like, like kind of growing relationships with people that are not believers, that there may be things that I might be comfortable doing with my closest friends that are believers that I wouldn't do over here, even though that person doesn't think there's anything wrong with it, just because it's not that I'm putting on a show for them. I'm not wanting, we're coming at it from 2 totally different motivations. And so I think I have to be aware of my actions and how my actions might support, endorse, I think behavior or addictions or whatever there might be in someone's life that I think is unhelpful. So I think abstinence can be really, really powerful in those types of, even when the action is not sinful, I still think there's something powerful. Like, oh yeah, that's not for me. It's kind of like what you're talking about with your jokes. Maybe there's certain words that you're like, I'm not offended by this, and I don't think it's sinful, but I'm not going to use it because even all of these people do, and I think there's something powerful about them seeing me not do it. I think I really believe in that.
Yeah.
So I think it's something to consider.
This is the last question I have on the text, so if anybody else has one, you can ask. Also, if you have the courage to stand in front of everyone at this microphone,
it's not that bad. Is it?
No one will do it.
Okay, well, let's see. Now that you said no one will, someone will.
Yeah, now somebody will. But if you do it, I'll go to you with your question. Is it a sin to buy alcohol for others specifically when you know they misuse it, but you do it because you don't want to start a fight? It sounds like there's more to this question than.
Well, I think that's a really. Yeah, I mean, I think you already know the answer to your own question.
I didn't ask it.
No, I know, but I'm just saying. I think I think you know the answer to that question.
Yeah.
And I think I would be wanting to think about the nature of my relationships and what am I looking for in pleasing people. Is there something there that I definitely think there's something there that's unhealthy that you're going to have to probably wrestle with before God. It's like, what am I? Yeah, I mean, ultimately, what we're looking at is approval of man thing over approval of God. What's right? So I think I think we have to. Yeah, I wouldn't do it. Totally.
I missed a question. This is really good. I think you have a lot to say about this. The term helpful. We were talking about that at the beginning.
Yeah,
it can be hard to evaluate. Marijuana can be helpful as a sleep aid or when my mind is running. Does the Bible provide a standard or an idea of what is helpful?
Yeah, I do. I think it does, and it's going to be a challenge for me to try to articulate it here in this moment. We talked about this weekend. Psalm 1 says, "Blessed is the man who walks not in the counsel of the ungodly, or stands in the way of sinners, or sits in the seat of the scornful. But his delight is in the law of the Lord, and on his law he meditates day and night." In response to this, or as a result, he will be like a tree planted by streams of water that yields its fruit in its season, whose leaf also shall not wither, and whatever he does shall prosper. So here's what I would say. You were made. In fact, when there's a transition of leadership, really the biggest leadership transition, I think, in all of Scripture, from Moses to Joshua. Joshua's stepping into Moses, the most central and kind of significant figure of the Old Testament. Joshua's stepping into leadership, and the number one first command that God gives to Joshua is, "This book of the law shall not depart from your mouth, but you shall meditate on it day and night, and then you will have good success." So what God is saying is like, look, and I'm going somewhere with this, is that your whole life is meant to be saturated by the presence and thinking of God. And when you do this, there's a stability and a plantedness and I think a wisdom that comes out of that answers that question of whether or not something is that makes that really clear. If I'm trying to kind of parse that out right here, right now, like it's this or it's this, I think that's unhelpful. I think you're meant to live a life so I don't like the word dominated, but saturated maybe is the best word I have, so inundated with a biblical, Christ-centered imagination that I start to think like he thinks. And then what that does is that increases my level of wisdom and discernment. Proverbs, I think Proverbs 1:7 says, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom." It's like starting there rather than getting like a manual of plug and play instructions, just make it super clear for me. God's going, no, I want you to have an imagination so inundated with who I am and the way that I think. And so that's why Scripture becomes that's why this book matters so much, is because the more I'm in it, the wiser I become, the more planted I become. And I think what a lot of us are looking for is like a shortcut. It's like a bypass to that, which is, I don't really read this all that much, and I'm not really meditating on this, but can you just like shortcut me? Like, give me the Cliff Notes versions. Like, what can I do or not do? And we're at that point, I feel like we're almost gamifying God. Yeah. And just going, look, just give me the regulations and rules, and let me skip around all that kind of get to know you stuff, and let me just understand what you want me to do and not do. And I think like I would never. Well, I have, but I shouldn't. And I realize the difference in treating Heather that way. It's like, look, can you just tell me, make it simple, rather than like, let me get to know you. Let me understand you. Which would you want in a relationship? All of us would want someone to really know you.
Just on a practical side too, what you're saying about meditating on the word would be difficult if you're a little tipsy, hungover, or high.
Absolutely.
Just practically speaking.
Absolutely. And maybe maybe we're using those things as sort of replacements for this. Maybe one becomes a replacement for the other. Just a thought.
Whoever sent this last question, thank you, because it is a perfect transition to the end.
Okay.
I feel like I've gone to God over and over with things, substances I'm trying to escape. I can't seem to gain ground in those areas, even with community. Where do I go from here?
Yeah, I mean, I would find a counselor. I'd get some real help, and I think there's absolutely every biblical right to do that. So I think there's people that it's called common grace. God has raised people up with certain abilities, and I think even our understanding of psychology is part of that. Understanding how the mind works, how the body works, I think all of that is given to us by God. And so getting in with someone who can help you in that regard, just like if I know someone who's a Christ follower and is an addict, and they get into a sobriety program, that even if it's like a detox center, is that sinful if it's not Christian? No, I think that's absolutely a wonderful thing to be a part of. So I think you can utilize those types of things. And, God is good and gracious. Like, how many different programs do we have right now to help people through this? There's Celebrate Recovery, for drug addiction. There's, we've got friends here from Hope is Alive tonight, and that's part of what that's about. Yeah. So there's so many different avenues for finding help and healing, Christian counselors, medication where necessary. Like, we're living in a time where that's all possible. So I think you're not without help. Maybe it needs to be prayer and some practical steps that we're taking more than just having an accountability partner. Maybe I really need to start understanding where this is coming from, what's motivating it, what I'm looking for, and then to start to kind of untangle all of that and get some real practical help there. And I think God can work in those places every bit as much as he does everywhere else.
And just to release the stigma, I've gone to a counselor for years.
Me too.
And it is not, I don't know, when I was a kid, it was always a joke, like, oh, that couple needs counseling.
Sure.
It's not.
Yeah, it's not that.
It's not
anymore.
like that. And I'll just say, as another step, if you're like, man, I can't find anyone, or I don't have the money, or whatever, you go to churchonthemove.com and click the thing to reach out to a pastor. We'll get you pointed in the right direction.
Totally.
Yeah. Well, we have no more questions.
And no one stepped up to the mic.
No one would do it. I was really hoping somebody was going to do it. What else do you want to say to about this subject matter that we didn't cover?
I think I vomited it all out, unless there's another question. Yeah, I'm good. Oh, is someone coming to the mic?
Oh my God! Clap at him! Clap at him!
Okay. Welcome, race fans.
Tall people and microphones don't go together, do they? We're always having to hunch over.
So much empathy, Whit. So much. So, as someone who naturally, I'm with students all the time.
Yes.
In a very literal sense.
Because you're a teacher.
That's right.
Okay.
But I would ask this in their stead, as a young follower of Christ who's attempting to do my best to follow Christ in the stream of culture, this stream of consciousness and belief that I am bombarded with on a daily basis. If coping and a lot of what is being discussed has to do with that, and that's the thing behind the thing, then how do I insulate my heart from falling into that slipstream or current?
Yes.
That'd be my question.
I really think it's going to come down to limits and boundaries. And I think, the greatest, parenting mistake Heather and I have made was to open up the door to social media and the whole, world of the internet and all of this to our kids sooner than they were ready to handle and deal with. I've talked about this a lot. My 15-year-old son, Elliot, still doesn't have an iPhone. And he's asked for it for years. He's come to a place where he's at peace with it. Like, he's not terribly bothered by it. He's got a Nokia T9 phone that you have to hit each button 3 times to get the letter that you want. It takes him about 10 minutes to compose about a 15-word text. But it's all good. Like, I would rather that difficulty and him not be, and by the way, he's still battling and dealing with a lot of the junk that's out there too, because it just it seeps in just about every crack in the foundation. It's all there. So but I think what we want is a kind of, can I have my cake and eat it too culture. Oh, I want to be on Instagram. I want to be able to do all of this stuff. I want to have fun, but I don't want the downside effects. And it's like, you can't have it both ways. So I think you're going to have to make some hard choices. And Jesus made this really clear. He's like, if your right hand offends you, cut it off. If your right eye is offending you, gouge it out. It's like, in other words, are you willing to go to some extreme measures? Are you willing to handicap yourself so that you can live a different kind of life? And I think what we want is a Christianity that just really doesn't look all that different from the way that everybody, because we're kind of like Adam and Eve in the garden, which is like, yeah, but that fruit looks pretty good. like that world of success and fame and beauty and everything that everybody else has. I kind of like it, and I'd like to have a little bit of that. And you too, God. Is there a way that we can do that? And I think that even when, Adam and Eve are eating of the fruit of the tree, I don't think they're going, curse you, God, we hate you, we're choosing someone else above you. I think they're going, like, is there a way we can work this out where, like, we can have everything? And you just can't. So I think you're going to have to be willing. I think they're going to have to be willing to, draw some boundaries and say this. If this is these coping mechanisms, it's amazing to me because it's like the question's almost, ridiculous to me. I get it, but it's like I do all this stuff over here, and then over here I'm having I can't sleep, and I have anxiety, and I'm all of this, and it's like, well, have you ever thought about getting rid of this? Well, no, or I can't. And I'm just like, wow, it's like, how it seems like 1 + 1 = 2. Let's just change the equation. But I'm sure it's not that easy. But I think that's the only answer. It's going to have to get radical. Yeah.
Clap for Matt for coming to the mic.
Thanks, Matt.